Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, February 23rd City Council regular meeting. At this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I hear adoption of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Okay, moving second. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Okay, passed unanimously. We will move on. First, we have a presentation from the King County Solid Waste Program. And online, we have Amy Locklander. Hi, how are you? I haven't seen you for a while. Welcome, Mayor.
Good,
And
Mayor.
then-
Good to be here.
And Andy Smith, the Recycle Environmental Service Manager. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Who's gonna take it away?
I think I'm going to lead the presentation, and I'm going to share my screen because I got some slides. Just to warn you all, this is sometimes when technology sort of can you not hear me?
It's very echoey.
Yeah, your sound isn't really very good right now.
Let me try moving towards the laptop. Can you? Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's better.
Okay, I apologize for that. As I was saying, I mean, I was probably pre-warning you that I was going to have technical problems when I said this is sometimes when the wheels come off when I try and share my screen, but apparently I didn't even get that far this time. So apologies for that, but let me start sharing my screen now. Do let me know with a thumbs up that you can see my screen okay. Okay, great. So thank you so much for having us. My name is Andy Smith. I'm the Environmental Services Section Manager at the King County Solid Waste Division, here to talk about our RE+ program, which we're very excited about. It's our new program focused on improving waste diversion and recycling. The animated GIF that you saw just as I shared my screen really helps, I think, to tell the story of RE+. Apologies, I'm having some technical issues. My GIF has stopped moving. So imagine that as continuing to move and trying to tell the story. It should be saying things like reuse, repair, restore. And that's really because that is what the RE+ program is all about. All of those good words that you often hear around our agenda. And what we really want people to think about is those words before throwing things away, and really ask yourself, can you RE+ it instead? So here's the mission and vision statement for the program. As you will have heard before, the King County has a zero waste of resources goal. So that means about 70% of those things which are currently being thrown away every year is useful. It's that cardboard, metal, food, etc., that can all be put to much better, more useful, more productive uses. And at the moment, that's all going to landfill. So the goal of RE+ is to really minimize our environmental impacts by moving towards that zero waste. And when we do that, we're also creating lots of opportunities for folk in King County to thrive. So what does zero waste look like? What does zero waste of resources mean for folk here? Well, because it means much less material going to landfill, around 500,000 tons, that can mean fewer trees being cut down every year to make paper, or the proportion of food that's thrown away that is still edible that could feed up to 92,000 people. It can also mean more jobs. So for us, RE+ is a jobs engine, because more people are needed to collect materials, process materials, build capital infrastructure, etc. So we could also save disposal costs in the future. A decision has not been made yet about what to do after Cedar Hill closes, but if we choose other items and haven't reduced our amount of tonnage going to final destination, then it can really increase costs later. And then finally, thinking about all of those plastics that are currently being sent to landfill, we've calculated that if you think about all of the oil that goes in to make those plastics, we could save around 150,000 barrels of oil from being burnt. Those are really big potential benefits for the folk in our region. So we think that REPLUS is also a call to action that incorporates a lot of the goals in both county and also your city commitments. You know, being a K4C commitment city, it's clear that you have a commitment to tackle climate. So when we start thinking about what delivering REPLUS means, so zero waste in landfill by 2030, thinking about all of the reuse and reduction and prevention efforts that go into delivering county code that's consistent with this, the solid waste management plan, all have been adopted by cities in 2019. A big key component of this agenda is also the social justice strategic plan. As we implement and develop REPLUS, we really want to address disproportionate burdens on our communities and also create equitable opportunities for people to benefit and participate in the program. We want to also make sure that we are engaging communities where they are and understanding, you know, what do people think about when they hear about the agenda. So we enlisted EMC Research to do some surveying of residents in King County to really gauge how much they support on the concept. And this slide just shows that just hearing a very brief introductory statement about REPLUS, there's generally really strong support, you know, 63% support with only 8% opposed. It's also really interesting. There's also a lot of don't really know. So that 29% is a pretty significant figure. So this next slide shows more the more general response to some of the waste and reduction prompts that we gave people. So we started folk with just a very top level statement about REPLUS and what it was. And then we went through more details, as you can see here, on the type of questions. So for example, the first one shows that we asked around harmonized recycling. You know, a whopping 91% of King County residents agree or somewhat agree that that is actually a big and important thing that we should be looking at. And that makes sense, right? Because we have people that live, work, and play in all parts of the county. And depending on where they are, they might be getting different messages. I'm not going to go through all of the details on this slide, but one of the big takeaways is that just about everything we asked folk about, whether they agreed or strongly agreed with statements, we generally got a very strong response. I also want to just note that it was also very interesting that when we went back and asked people about, you know, whether they supported REPLUS after hearing some information about REPLUS or their statements, we converted the majority of them into support. So that 29% of don't know went down to 0, and the majority went over into strongly and somewhat support. So again, I think that really does demonstrate there is an underlying general commitment in our region to the agenda. Before jumping onto some more of the REPLUS program specifics, I just want to put a little bit of the REPLUS work into context. So as you'll know, King County has a 50-year history of waste management innovations. You know, we were one of the first regions to adopt curbside recycling programs. We have one of the nation's leading diversion programs for construction and demolition materials, as well as a collection of yard waste. But as you can see from the chart, you know, since 2010, we haven't had a significant increase in recycling rates in our region. And so part of REPLUS is really looking at, you know, how can we really improve those recycling rates moving forward? And there's definitely some areas that we think are particular ways that we could do that. You know, we could look at increasing organics recycling collection. So I'll speak in a few slides about some of the work that we're doing on that. There's also policy proposals at the state level, so around extended producer responsibility, So that is bringing in producers of packaging materials to take more of the responsibility for cost and management of the system, as well as looking at sort of more system-wide policy actions, so around banning food waste, for example. You know, thinking about the overall benefits that could deliver when we look at regions which have adopted some or all of these policies, they have much higher recycling rates than we have. So it is one of the things that, you know, we want to tackle. So just a very quick overview of the current RE+ actions. I'm not going to go into all of them because the program does have a lot of projects associated with it. We have chosen some priority action materials, and so that's plastic, paper, food, and yard waste. And we're really targeting those because they make up the majority of materials that have value that are currently sent to the landfill. So organics in particular is a big focus, especially around food. Tackling food waste not only helps our RE+ goals, but also helps to significantly benefit our climate objectives. So when we look at the consumption emissions for our region, food and wasted food is a big and driving factor of those emissions. Also, tackling food waste will also help to tackle food insecurity. So we're invested in driving more action around single-family organics in particular, really looking at the type of policies that have worked elsewhere, such as every other week garbage collection, food waste bans, and other things. And at the moment, we're engaging in a consultative process, and we're going to want to hear from King County residents around that. We're starting with an anonymous survey and following up with focus groups and an open house. I don't have access to chat in this webinar, but I can follow up today with the link, so you'll be able to share that with your city residents so they can participate in that survey. So taking together all of the different things that we are wanting to do with RE+, we think there is really significant potential in the programs. We think that up to around 400,000 tons of waste could be diverted to better use. That's a really big number. Reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, or the metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, by 300,000 is also a really large number, and it's the equivalent driving a car 744 million miles. That, I'm told, would get us almost to Saturn from Earth. So that's a lot of carbon that could be saved. There are also other things to consider. It takes money to implement these actions, capital investments, staff to provide assistance to cities and businesses. The rates are likely to increase. One thing to note is that residents see the largest drop in their garbage bill when they move to smaller size bins. So as people adjust their behavior, they will be able to offset any increases in rates by moving to a smaller garbage can, for example. And this is also going to require significant amounts of behavior change. So businesses and people, you know, who start to sort out their waste are going to need support to do that. A good example is with food waste, as I discussed earlier, especially around businesses where they have to put organics into bins. They need to know how to do that, what spaces is needed to do that, what services are available for those bins to be collected. All of that requires partnerships with us and the private haulers, and that's going to be a lot of the work moving forward. So what can cities do to help further this effort? Well, cities together are where the biggest opportunity for change really does lie, and are also one of the most important partners in the RE+ effort. We're asking cities to sign a RE+ pledge, which is a very high-level agreement to the principles that will move us all closer to that zero waste future and incorporate key elements of the RE+ agenda. Key parts of that include policy updates, as well as supporting legislation that is in line with RE+. We also are developing a city RE+ grant, and we'll be launching that shortly. And the cities that are signatories to the pledged will be able to apply for that competitive grant offer. We also want to work in partnership with cities to educate residents and businesses on how they can do better for the RE+ objectives. And all of that is in line with the 2019 comprehensive plan update. So this is just a quick summary of where we're at to. So this is a presentation that we're giving to we're offering to all of our cities in the region. We have a goal that by June we will have presented to 37 cities, and right now I think we're doing pretty well. I think Amy would agree with that. We've got a number of cities completed, a number of cities scheduled. Obviously, that city is not scheduled. We want to sort of get that down to, hopefully 0 or as close to 0 as we can do. This is, as I mentioned, RE+ can't be done by a city alone or a county alone. It's a real partnership moving forward. So we really want to sort of move forward on that. And then finally, just to say some great news, we've had 4 pledges signed so far. And so we're definitely excited to expand that list and move that list further. We really want to be able to sign 12 pledges by the end of May this year. And I hope to think that we're on track for that too. We would love to sort of have further discussion about how sort of your city can fit into the RE+ City Pledge offer. And with that, I'm just putting my contact details on the screen. Also, our project manager who looks after the RE+ program, Patty, who would often also give this presentation, is also a great person to connect with if you have questions. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open to questions.
Council, you have any questions for Andy? Yes, Councilmember Freddie.
Thank you for your presentation. Really appreciate it. Do I have to push the button? All right, and the question I had was, I always see this term recycling rates, and as you mentioned, it's been relatively flat over the last decade. Is that what are the units of it? Is it by mass or by the number of people who participate? How is that calculated?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the recycling rate is calculated by weight. So the material that's collected, and it can be offset by, for example, increases in sort of population. So the population can, as the population increases and behavior change also increases, it can also offset potential increases in efficiencies within the calculation. We are looking at also thinking about doing a per capita rate calculation to see if we can target more demographic shifts, but this calculation is based on weight.
Right, thank you. And can I do a follow-up?
Okay.
Yeah, and so the follow-up to that is there sort of a target percentage that you have in mind?
Yeah, so we have a target percentage of 70%. We don't like to use 70% because it can be confusing with also our 70% goal. So we think that 70% of material going to landfill shouldn't be going there, but we also think that 70% of material should be recycled. They're 2 different calculations, and so we don't like to use that 70% too much. Just on the recycling rate nationally, so as I said, we're at around 54% here in King County. We are doing much better than the average in the US, which is actually just only higher than 31%. So compared to the US, we are doing much better. However, compared to where we think we need to be in order to sort of deliver our environmental goals, we need to be doing much better.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Yes, Councilmember Castlever.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Andy, for the presentation. One of the things that I hear when I talk to my constituents is that they're worried that the items that they're recycling are in fact not getting to to put to another good use. And I wonder whether in your program, you are going to be able to give more information to residents and the general population about what the markets are for recycling materials and how they're being used, and whether the work that we go to sort things out and get them in the right bins is actually paying off for us.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, there's like a couple of components to that. So the first is, are things that are being collected going to be made into other things? Are they being recycled? Are they connecting with valuable end markets? And for a lot of materials, the answer is yes. A lot of the sort of, in particular, high value plastics, the metal that are being collected is going to sort of other end markets. There are materials that, are collected that actually don't connect that well with end markets. What we found, however, is that when we give a lot of that information to residents, some residents get very confused. And what we've found is that actually simplifying our messages is a bit easier. So rather than talking about, for example, all of the resin codes of all of the different types of plastics that are recyclable, we found it a bit easier to talk to folk about the size and shape of material and instead focusing on our messaging on that. That being said, we do want to put out more information around end markets. And one of the things we want to encourage, especially in contracts with when cities engage in contract renegotiations, is to really lean into downstream due diligence. So really lean into having the haulers report on where they're selling their materials to. We've done that in some of our contracts with our self-hauling King County. So we now get reported on, where materials are being sold to, in particular, which countries they're being sold to. That will help us then monitor sort of where our materials are going. And then we can work with the haulers in order to either propose sort of limiting where materials go. So thinking about going to developing countries in particular, or it will help us to generate new market opportunities.
Thank you.
Any other council members? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you very much, Andy. Amy, you could say a few words if you'd like.
I don't have much more to add. Andy does a fantastic job representing the program. The only thing I would have to add is that we hope that you'll consider approving the pledge in a formal manner and become one of the next cities on this list. And we look forward to collaborating with you over the next several years as we work to fully implement this program and to support cities in their climate work as well. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, council. Have a great evening, people. Thank you. Okay, with that, we will move on to our next presentation. The Climate Action Committee. I think we have Sarah Phillips and Minnie Setram here. And Corey is the liaison, or not the liaison, that would be that'd be council member for a time. And Corey, by the way, when they're all done, we need you to stay. We have a question for you, so you're gonna have to come up here and just, okay?
What could possibly go wrong, Corey?
Welcome. You know,
This is
Sarah,
high
when,
tech. Red means we're talking, right? Thank you for inviting us and try. Oh, now what am I doing? She said all I had to do was push this button. Corey, you misled me. Sorry. Well, I'll talk anyway. Imagine a lovely picture, whatever the best picture of Lake Forest Park you could possibly imagine. You know, it was a year ago when you set up the Climate Action Committee, you established it. And what you said was that you wanted us to, the purpose of the Climate Action Committee is to gather and analyze climate, climate information and draft a climate action plan for the recommendation for the city council. And the first thing so we tried to do that. So what we want to talk about tonight, just to sort of this is just an interim catch-up report on what we've done. We found that we've done 2 landmark things, and we just wanted to tell you about them because we've told the public in our meetings, and we wanted you to know what they knew. So the first, our agenda is just who we are, where we are on our work plan. And the 2 landmarks are really the King County emissions study that focused on Lake Forest Park. So what are our emissions issues? And then we did a survey, and we want to talk about that. And then just clarify that we're all on the same page about what comes next. So this is the best thing you did. I mean, I know you do a lot of fabulous things, but the best thing you did was this committee. This is a committee of extraordinary members of the community. They're people who, we have 4 professors, including Mimi, and we have 2 business owners who work both one in geotechnical and one in shorelines. They bring extraordinary resources. We have retired people, and we have a couple of students who have added a dimension to this, to our work. They're probably going to roll off in September. They're both going off to college, and we think far away. We did offer them a technological, but we'll see. So I just want to talk a little bit about the work plan. You'll remember this. I'm going to show it to you, and then I'm going to say we didn't make it. So I'm going to tell you that first. This is our work plan, and we had hoped to get something to you actually this month, and we don't have it. One of the things that we've come to realize is that without a consultant and without that it loses what a consult. I was a consultant at one point in my life, and you bring a single focus to things. So without a consultant working with us on this, we are a disparate group trying to bring strands of spaghetti together on this writing project. So it's exciting, but we're not going to have this work plan for you this week. We're working on it, and we're hoping to have a draft by April. So we'll climate action plan. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to report quickly on 2 kind of landmarks in our work. And the first is that we were looking, we were asking the question, of course, what are our emissions in Lake Forest Park? And the we're relying on the King County study that they did of all of the cities in King County. And so I'm going to show you a picture. These are our emissions. And I realize it's hard to see, but it's really that the answer is our emissions come from transportation and from buildings for the most part. And if we solve those, we'd be really on our way to solving some of the emission issues in Lake Forest Park. One of the things that's on here that I'm just going to say is confusing, and that's right away, is this aviation. That was a piece that what the county did was figure out all the aviation emissions and divided it by income and population. So that's our segment, and I don't think we can do anything about it except say to people, if you're a fuel engineer, you ought to go work for Boeing and figure out how to grow it from algae. Right? That's their big thing. So, but we will be monitoring that, and we will, by the county emission standard, be allotted a certain amount of aviation. The others off-road vehicles are ski-doos and construction equipment and golf carts, things like that. But those are our big emission categories. And that's not a surprise. Everywhere we go, and every city and every jurisdiction, these are the 2 issues are transportation and buildings. And mostly for us, the buildings issue is around natural gas. 75% of the homes in Lake Forest Park have natural gas as either cooking or heating. So there's a lot of natural gas in Lake Forest Park, and it is an emissions issue. So there we are. So the second landmark we did was we did a survey, and we did a community survey. We had 40 multiple multiple choice, short answer question. It was just for us a first step of sort of taking the temperature of the community about what they felt were the most important issues in climate. It was a tool for us, and it isn't a scientific survey. I mean, it isn't a random sample. We gave it out to people as broadly as we could. We designed it ourselves. We had, again, some expertise and some issues. We distributed it at farmers markets and other events. We went to 39 different groups in the shoreline. We put it in the newspapers. We put it in apartment complexes, schools, PTAs, and every association that any of us had that had a mailing list. It was out from August to December. It was out a good long time. We had 446 people responding, which we think is a pretty healthy number. But again, when we look at the answers to the survey are the people who answered the survey. The main takeaways from the survey is that this community cares very much about climate change. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit about that again. That the other thing is that the individuals in the community get their information from an incredibly divergent source of information, which makes contacting people and giving people good information is hard, because it's not like there's one paper and everybody reads it. The other main takeaway was that our citizens felt that we should partner with neighboring cities to collaborate on climate issues. And we'll come back and talk about the heat pumps that the East Side is doing. And that we have some other, and we asked people, well, the good news is that people in Lake Forest Park were incredibly responsive, and they wrote lots of things. And that was also the hard part, is they wrote lots of things. And we spent, I don't know, 25 hours sorting through the answers to people's questions and sorting them and trying to figure out what they were. But they led us to the kinds of things that where we need to do both outreach and education. So it was very informative about what issues they were concerned about, what issues they had some questions about. And this is the chart of the answers about the level of concern about climate change in Lake Forest Park. And we kind of compared it with the nation. And let me say, the 88% of the Lake Forest Park respondents are either very concerned or somewhat concerned about climate change. It's a huge number for people who are concerned. And then we thought it was interesting to put it to sort of contrast it with the national, that in fact the people in Lake Forest Park have a higher, very concerned level than the nation as a whole. We had some people who weren't concerned. There's a sort of a consistent 10% who are not concerned at all about climate, and we just need to take that into consideration as we move forward. And again, this is what we talked about before, that individuals in the community gather their information from a huge number of sources. When we looked at these issues and we asked them to name them specifically, lots of people said the internet. No, there weren't anything that we could identify as if you say, well, if I went here, people would hear about it, or if I went here. So it's very diverse. And you must experience that yourselves whenever you have information to get out to people, that it's hard to find them and tell them what you want to tell them and get back from them. So it's not news. The other interesting thing was one of the top priorities was that Lake Forest Park should partner with cities as we address the issue of climate change. And that may be because the East Side cities are doing something quite interesting, but that would assume that our respondents all knew that. But that is this Energy Smart East Side, and the 5 cities on the East Side are working on an issue around heat pumps, and they've worked with providers and they have rebate programs and they have identified who are good heat pump installers, and they're doing common publicity. That's just an example of ways that we could work together. And I think it's our 5 cities, when we have 5 cities too, Shoreline, Lake Forest Park, Bothell, Kenmore, and Woodinville. But that would be a nice coalition moving around on some of these issues. And many of our sister cities are ahead of us in looking at the issue. So maybe we can just piggyback on some of the work that they've done. This is a huge slide that I'm just going to go to the 3 most popular strategies, and that was partnering with other cities. Transitioning to non-fossil fuels was another high priority, and inform residents about existing incentives for people and businesses. So those were the highest priorities. And what we did was we had a list of things where they could choose from. So it wasn't a total pick anything from the universe. This was the universe we described for them, and within that universe, they picked that. The least popular things were to establish a library for people to check out power tools. This was a surprise to me. Establish a electric powered community shuttle. I mean, we talk about that love, but it didn't turn out to be a priority. And require homeowners to selling their house to provide a energy audit, which they're doing in Portland and some other cities. People didn't like that at all. They didn't want one more thing to do when they're selling their houses. The short answers, I'm just what helped us do some stuff about education and outreach. And they were sort of public information about public transportation. One of the things is people are worried to get on the buses. They're worried about COVID. They're worried about health. They're worried about all the things that Metro is saying right now. Same set of things. How do you get people back on the bus? They're very, as you, this is not anything you don't know. They're really pressed about 522 not going downtown. But we haven't provided there, it'd be helpful to get one bus away and all those other tools that people could figure out how to get there from their phone to use the system. So public transportation is one area where we think we need to do some education. One of the questions was, why aren't you walking? And the answer was, it's too dangerous. And that is in contrast with, speaking, it's recorded, right? So there's no speaking out of school, but they want sidewalks, but they don't want to pay for them, right?
No comment.
But people were concerned, and it wasn't that grownups didn't walk, but it was mostly school kids didn't walk to school. There wasn't the sense that if your neighborhood is like mine, people are walking, but children aren't riding their bicycles on my street, and young people aren't walking. And the issue around switching to electric appliances, and we're thinking that probably there's some educational work we can do there. This stuff about gas stoves was sort of a blow up, but what we do know, what the science is telling us is that gas stoves, people who have gas stoves and don't have good ventilation are more likely to have asthma. That's less healthy for their children. The indoor air quality wouldn't meet the outdoor air quality of the EPA, but you're running your gas stove all the time. But we're not telling people to switch. I think the strategy is going to be, we're talking about this is, we're calling it get ready to get ready. And that is sometime your stove's going to break. And when your stove, if you have a gas stove or any kind of stove, so get ready now. Think about what it is you're going to need, how you find it. So that you're not in that point where, your water heater, for example, dribbling in your basement. That's not a good time to go shopping. That's a good time to get a different water heater. But if you know what you want and you're ready to go. So we're thinking that may be a campaign, get ready to get ready. We're not telling anybody they have to take out their anything. But we think that the educational pieces would be good to do. Incentives. There are a lot of incentives on these programs that are coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. And the third area where we need to do some more work is electric vehicles. People have, there's nothing there's nothing surprising about the responses that people got. They're the same things that, they have anxiety that they're gonna get in their car and run out of power. And won't be a pumping station. But they're also concerned about expense. And we're talking about what we know is that in the long term, EVs are going to be cheaper to buy, not to buy, but to run over the life of the car. So we're thinking about how you talk about electric vehicles. For us, the next steps are we're going to continue to do outreach at the Green Fair and Farmers Market and the Garden Tour, primarily because we think that's the way we can reach out to most Lake Forest Park people, given the diversity of how they get places. There's a sort of a one-to-one strategy. It's a tough strategy, though. It's hard to change things in that outreach. We are going to draft a climate action plan for you. And we're not sure what the next step is. We don't know whether you want us to go check out, take a draft plan and bring it to the community and say, what do you like about this and not like about it? And then bring it to you. Or if you wanted us to bring you something and you say, well, maybe this is okay, why don't you test it with the community? Then we go back out and then you'd get it and hold your public hearings. That's unclear to us about how you want us. So you can tell Corey after we're finished what you really want us to do. And then we want to figure out now how we can work with the city council to explore partnership opportunities. And this is a staff issue. I mean, in part, I know you don't have staff. I know things are tight. But if you're going to do some work with partnerships, I think it has to be a staff to staff or council to council. Well, there needs to be something besides a couple of citizens on the committee, I think. And that's gonna be an issue. The other thing I do want to say, and I don't know if we said this, oh yeah, we did, that in the long term, implementing a climate action plan is going to cost something. It's going to cost you staff time. It's not going to cost you staff time this year while we're developing the plan and doing some implementation. But if you're serious in the next 2 years, you've got to figure out how to fund this. And it can't be a third of somebody's job. This is a critical issue. And I know you've got financial issues, but I'm just setting you up to say that in the long term, this is a critical funding piece that you're going to have to figure out how to do that. Kenmore has just put out, I don't know if Tracy shared with you, they're hiring a full-time person to do some implementation. And they have 2 people who are working on it now. So they'll be adding a third full-time, a third person who is full-time and a couple of part-time people. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for them tonight? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you both for all the efforts you have put into this effort. I've been reading recently about community geothermal heat pumps. And I find that, I mean, it's the science is in its kind of nascent days, but the most efficient heat pumps are geothermal, air to air, very good. But has that topic ever come up in terms of, because the regulations surrounding that are kind of challenging. Of course, too, around here, regulations surrounding water source heat pumps as well are very strictly regulated by the state, and that's very challenging. We don't really have bodies of water that we can utilize for that. But the community geothermal heat pump systems are really fascinating, where a community is built and they share a ground loop system that each of the compressors and the air handlers are connected to, so that they don't have to do the massive trenching and drilling that is necessary for that kind of system.
So you're talking about geothermal for a group of houses?
Exactly. Yeah.
That hasn't come up in our.
It's a fascinating science, and it's coming up, and it's really interesting because most people don't have the lot size to do the kind of heating cooling coils that are necessary for that kind of.
I don't know.
I'll send you something because I think it's fascinating. I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, I was just figuring out. Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, thank you very much for getting started and doing all the work you've done. I just think it's so valuable to our city, which does have limited resources and staff, to have this kind of community energy and effort. I do think it's going to be a challenge going forward, whether it's parks maintenance or climate change action implementation. We're going to have to look into getting the property tax levy rate increased, and the last experience was, disappointing, to say the least. People, in my view, people want all these services, but we don't seem to want to pay even, $20 a month to have them. So we can deal with that later on. My question is, in my previous employment, I was working with community solar issues. And a question, are our schools, are Brookside and Lake Forest Park Elementary included in that King County emission study? Do you know? And what kind of heat do they have? Do you know? Because they're big, they're pretty big structures in our city. So you don't have to answer if you don't know.
Do you?
Yeah,
We
but
met with they've come, the district representatives for the school
Superintendent.
came to one of our meetings, and they're kind of working on their own plans too.
but
we're
but
trying to
still,
coordinate,
if it's
yeah.
included in our envelope, and it's a big chunk of the natural gas, for example.
Right.
And so I just wanted to raise the issue of community solar, because where I was working with some Oregon utilities as part of a board, the local utilities were actually implementing solar in the schools. Public utilities like Seattle City Light, and they were, basically it was a win-win. And you also could have a public education component because you involve the students and the parents in that kind of structure. So it's a variation on Councilmember French's idea, which is how do you use renewable energy in a more collective sense? So that it isn't house by house, but you actually have some kind of, either larger structure or a microgrid, they call it, where multiple properties are using the same source. So anyway, it maybe that's phase 2, but at least if we could find out what the situation is with the schools. I personally would like to encourage the idea of solar in the schools.
So there are several of the schools do have solar. The ones that have been recently upgraded do have solar. So Park has it. And we've done some work in community solar with another organization, People for Climate Action. Lake Forest Park did a research project with one of Mimi's students. And they ran it. The problem there is legislative in terms of statewide. I'm going to get this wrong, so help me. But I think it had to do with how many homes could, if it was generated collectively, how many homes could it be distributed to?
Mhm.
That was limited by Seattle City Light.
Interesting.
So it was a distributed problem. And I know there've been some work by some other organizations working on the issue of expanding this community solar. So you could, put a little solar farm somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Goldman and then Councilmember Cassover.
Thank you very much for your update. It's very useful. I have a comment and a question. The comment, I was impressed by the response rate you got on your survey. Over 400 responses. And I think that's something the city can learn from. I know the Planning Commission did a survey on ADUs and got a high response rate. So I think that's something we can look at for just broad outreach on projects that we have. My question for you, thinking about the climate action plan in general, do you have a feel for how much of it will be educational outreach for residents versus administrative things the city can do versus legislation that the city might pass?
I don't, but one of the things we do know from looking at other people's other cities' plans is that the municipal piece is quite small. If you did everything right, everything, no gas on anything and fixed everything internally, it wouldn't be much of an impact. I mean, it would be 5 or 6% in other cities. The issues are, and I don't know if it's the police cars are like super users, right? And we don't know if the school buses, it's the same issue. We didn't know if the super users are the school buses and the police vehicles. But so it's hard. So the answer is we really don't know yet, but the municipal piece is providing leadership. The notion that, if the city went all electric vehicles, it would be a demonstration that you could, run a lot of cars all the time on electric vehicles. That's the leadership piece that that we intend that the city would provide. You talked about getting battery powered tools.
Yeah.
That's a leadership issue. So a lot of places we see the role of the city is, if you get power tools out there and they're all battery operated and they're quieter and they don't stink like of gas, they don't smell of gas. That's a leadership issue, which we think the city has a significant role in providing.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cassover.
Yes, thank you very much. And following on from Councilmember Goldman, I also was curious whether you would talk about the role the city can play. And I agree with you, it is a leadership role, but I do believe it's important. And I hope that in your report to us, you will point that out so that it gives us an impetus to actually take action on things like procurement and but also things like how we think about our city facilities, whether we are doing everything we can do here at City Hall, at other facilities the city owns. The other question I had, and I may just have missed it in your presentation, in terms of next steps, you said one of your next steps was outreach to the community, and I wasn't quite clear what the purpose of the outreach was. Is that to tell them about the plan or to gather more data or
Get feedback on the plan.
Right, okay, good, thank you.
But I do want to say, Councilmember Cassover, that in 2007 or 8, the city did do a climate action plan. And Corey reported that you have done many of those things already. It was a different time and the issues were different, but there was some implementation already on city.
Yes, there has certainly been some implementation and I think we can do more. And if I could just follow up with another question, Mr. Mayor, the other issue that I wonder if you're going to include in your plan is the idea of climate resiliency and what it takes for us as a community to think about when it comes to climate resiliency. Obviously, we're pretty focused on our trees, and we understand that that's a very important piece of climate resiliency, but it's also a little bit of a Achilles heel for us too, because the species of trees that we have may in fact be somewhat vulnerable as the climate changes. So I just would hope that maybe, I don't know whether you can collaborate somewhat with the tree board or, but some information about that would be good. The other thing that I do hope, and I note who's on your board, so who's on your committee, so I understand this a little bit. We're a community of gardeners here in Lake Forest Park, and our gardens actually can play a big role in climate resiliency. And I think that's another area of public education that could be very valuable when it comes to things like making sure that we don't lose all our pollinators and things like that. So that may be sort of expanding a little bit beyond some of the thinking that you've had on your group, but I do hope maybe we could get some of that back too.
Well, two things. One is we have an outline that we're working on, and we do have what is the issue and what are the response and what is resiliency as sort of our three repeating kinds of things. And who knows, I don't want to hold me to that, but we think that would. And the other is that the gardeners were very responsive to the survey. And they were talking a lot about their backyards and the bunnies. They don't like bunnies anymore. And taking out lawns and then that's talking about that as strategies and pollinating. And the Rotaries around here are doing also things. There's a lot that's the other pieces that the community organizations, the Rotaries and the Stewardship Foundation are all partners in this effort. And that's going to be we do need to figure out how to work specifically with them as we roll this out more. But there's clearly partnership opportunities in terms of the implementation and strategies.
Thank you.
Yes. Councilmember Weaver.
Thank you for the presentation. Just to follow up on your last thing about partnership and collaboration, I hope that as a small community, that we don't think we're so special that we need to reinvent everything. And that in many ways we can adopt or take heart on those that have come before us. And so if there's a smart energy east side, is there a smart energy west side?
Mhm.
And that what we're doing is in fact aligning with our other communities with the similar goals and development, so that in fact our ability to affect what we do is because we're in partnership and collaboration with our other surrounding cities. And that we haven't set ourselves up to be so different than Kenmore, Shoreline, or Woodinville or Bothell, that in fact we represent some of the same goals that they do. And that we're really just adopting in many ways the things that they are, so that collaboration and partnership is much more seamless. We don't have the resources to have 2 or 3 full-time people to do this effort. But if we're in collaboration with somebody else, then we can provide resources without necessarily providing the same level of staffing, because we've adopted many of the similar practices. I don't think we're so unique that we need to be special.
No, there was a day when we thought we'll just take the Kenmore one and do word search and take out Kenmore and put in and we're not.
So I would challenge to say, why not?
Have a better business, more business than more economic. But we are looking at that. And I do want to say that the consultant for many of these cities was the same.
Yes.
Cascade Consulting, and they're a fabulous consulting group, but there's a similarity among all of these. And so we are looking at them. I was going to tamp down your expectations. Ours is not going to have it's not going to be as fulsome. It's not going to have as many illustrations, but I think the content is going to be is similar enough across the studies that we will have pretty consistency. And I think that you're exactly right. We don't need to start from zero. We start further.
I would just offer that, we all know the adage, perfection is the enemy of good. And that when communities collaborate, and rather than think that they have to draft their own, but rather that they think in terms of adoption and implementation, I think we may be a better head. As they say, the best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago, and the second best time to plant a tree is today.
Thank you. Councilmember Furtani.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, committee, for the work you've been doing and are going to do in the future. My question for you is, you talked about partnering with other cities. You talked about partnering with the school districts and partnering with the civic organizations. But what about the utilities? They seem like they would play a critical role. And I know that there's some concern of people that I talk to about the capacity of our, for instance, electric grid, or, if we switch over to electrification, could we literally get enough power? Has there been any work that the committee's done on that kind of issue?
No, not specifically. I mean, we've outreach to both all of the utility, Lake Forest Park Sewer District, in terms of the sewer and the water district, so that they know what we're doing, but we haven't talked about. No. It's one of the things we've run into that's hard is putting solar on your roof doesn't reduce our emissions. And it's good, but we get most of ours from Seattle City Light. But putting solar on your roof is a good thing, and it enhances the grid. It enhances the reliability of the grid. Part of it is we don't want to, we got to sort of parse out, you know, we're not the environmental committee. So it's hard to, you know, the mission creep is a problem. And so we're trying to sort of figure out parse those out. But I think looking at the utilities, I mean, you Seattle City Light, we haven't had as a committee gone to talk to them, so.
I think that's also something King County is gonna start looking at, that's on their horizon, of course.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Following up on that, Seattle City Light should have a heat pump, incentive program, it seems to me, that would help our community. And so if there is such a thing, that is one of the ways to help implement the transition from natural gas when it's the right time. And sometimes just the fact that it's hot and people need air conditioning, or looking at air conditioning is an incentive, but it would be good if there were financial incentives from Seattle City Light. That would be a very good partnership if we could encourage that. But obviously they have a larger service area than just Lake Forest Park.
Well, part of what we want to do, you know, we're getting the plan and implementation sort of, they sort of go hand in hand, but the Inflation Reduction Act has significant rebates on all of these issues that go to individuals. What we have to do is try and make it easy for people to find them, access them, and then go ahead and some of them aren't always ready in place yet, but they're in the Inflation Reduction Act legislation, but not the.
Point well taken, thank you.
And some of the educational piece that we want to do is to get them ready to be ready, right? That whole thing about if they're not mentally ready to do it, even if they have the incentive, they still might not do it. So we want everything lined up.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none. Climate Action Committee, word in there's called action. You got some of the tenants, you have a bunch of really smart people that know what they're doing, and you did a heck of a survey. Do it, and don't be worried that the city doesn't have money. When you come back, you guys can come up with a plan that might never get done, but start with some stuff that we really can do, and if we need to figure it out, it's you. That's why we made the committee, and we put all you brilliant people on there. We're counting on you to tell us what to do, and don't be afraid and say, hey, city, you really need to do this, and we'll say we don't have any money, and then we'll have to figure out where to get the money. The city never has gotten anything because we had money. We've gotten it all because we know how to do stuff. So you do your job and we'll try to do ours, but I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And what's really a bad thing is the mayor, who is the leader of the city, owns a gas station. It's gonna be really hard to buy an electric car, but I'm gonna do my best, okay? Or at least my wife will. How's that? And
Thank
then,
you.
thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you.
Corey, will you approach the bench, please?
So
I'll start this out.
start,
It
yeah.
was brought to our attention today by our deputy mayor, and it was brought to our city administrator, and the mayor's brought up to us, and something neither of us could answer, and that doesn't usually happen, especially for Phil. So the deputy mayor is going to ask you something that he had to sign off on today, and I would like a straight answer, okay?
please.
Go ahead.
So we need to know who is grandpa and why are we spending $5,000 on his weeding tools?
Grandpa weed pullers. Those will be given out at the Green Fair, April 29th, so.
We need that.
Yeah. And remember, this is a family meeting.
Yeah. Sorry to make you
Yeah.
nervous, Corey, but we
No.
couldn't resist the
Yeah.
joke.
Tom goes, what are grandpa weeding you? What?
Yeah, you don't have to bend down.
Yeah, who is grandpa's? Why is he getting $5,000 from us?
Apple yard care.
So that was probably a grant though, too, wasn't it? Yes, thank you very
Thank you
much.
for what you do, Corey.
Thank you, Corey. All righty, council, thank you very much. And Tracy, thank you for all the work you've done on the committee. We appreciate that very much. With that, we will move on to citizens' comments. Chief? Thank you, sir. Think you wish you're at the hockey game with Jeff tonight? Jeff Sneddon. Remember, you have 3 minutes. Please state your name.
Jeff Sneddon, 15415 Beach Drive. I came to collect my $5,000 and I'm really disappointed that I'm not grandpa, but so be it. I'm actually here to talk about two things. One of them is this document, or actually analysis that I just sent to you a couple hours ago, so I'm sure you've all read it cover to cover. It's also been shared with the Sound Transit Board, the CEO and the CFO. It's based on a pretty exhaustive search of the Sound Transit website and public records requests. There's a lot of really interesting information in here. One, there's a breakout of cost by city for a couple of areas. One of them is property acquisition and permits. 2/3 of the property acquisition permits budget is being spent in Lake Forest Park. The second is the cost of construction management and construction costs itself. 55% is being spent here out of the entire project. And that's to build the 1.2 mile dedicated eastbound bus lane that saves the transit commuter 2.3 minutes in the afternoon during the peak hour, rush hour. To give you a context of the 2.3 minutes, that's 15% of the total time saved end to end on the commute. But the other interesting thing is that half of the time saved, 50% of the 16 minutes, is saved in the 13 blocks from the South Shoreline Link rail station to 15th Avenue and 145th. That's half of the time, transit time saved is in that 13 block. No bus lane, no dedicated bus lanes there. The other thing that was interesting, well, I'm going to skip that part because I'm running out of time. The second thing I wanted to talk about was the planned Sound Transit open house here, which is March 15th from 3 to 7. Couldn't be more inconvenient for people who work or who have kids in school. It's the first public meeting that they've had in 2 years. And I would ask you to get a hold of them and ask them to slide these hours back to make it more convenient for people to attend. I mean, it's the first time in 2 years that we've had any opportunity to interact directly with the Sound Transit Board, and they should make that time more convenient for the citizens of Lake Forest Park. And I have 42 seconds left, so I'll give it back to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay. I can't remember her name. Scurry, you're up.
Scurry, 15004 37th Avenue Northeast, and it's great to be here again. I want to thank you for scheduling a meeting with Lake Forest Park with Sound Transit, and I agree too that the hours aren't good for most people, and I hope that you can change the hours to an evening meeting, since most of our evening meetings are what we're used to attending, like maybe a 5 to 9, something like that. But I also want to say thank you for putting the all the documents on the website. And the only thing I would say too is that there really are no visualizations, so they're only good for engineers and people like me who read plans, but they aren't really terribly useful for the public. And so I think that's a communication you could give back to Sound Transit, is that we want to be able to see what they're building, not just look at it in engineering form, in civil plans. And then third, I have some good things to say. KCRHA donated money and we printed 5,000 of these postcards. And we have mailed these to the Lake Forest Park residents. And because we realize that most residents know very little about this project unless you're on the alignment. They're the only people who have any clue. So we're hoping this will get more community interest, more people will attend the Sound Transit meeting, and they'll also come to the KCRHA meeting, because we're hosting a meeting also on March 7th at 7 p.m. at the Lake Forest Park Elementary School. And we certainly invite all of you to come as well. And we've got all these dates on this flyer. Also, we have launched a website, and our website has a lot of information on this project. It has links to the plans. It has links to all the annotations that I've done. It has letters people have written. It has contact information. It has visualizations, and it basically tells you how to get in touch. So I'm hoping that we can really work to get this community organized. You asked me a long time ago how you get change. I said persistence of vision. I said dedication, and I said hard work. And that's what KCRHA is doing. And thank you.
Thank you. All good.
I'm going to speak about my neighbor first. So John Strong, he owns the attorney's office across from me. And he was approached, I think in 2019, first by Sound Transit that they were going to possibly acquire his property. And he had not heard anything from them through all of the board meetings or anything like that. They just recently hit him with an offer that is, so he bought the property in 2007. They offered him less than what he bought the property for. And they want to take all of his property. So he was very concerned because he had not heard anything, no community engagement at all from Sound Transit. So that was a little bit concerning. And he actually reached out to me and, you know, we provided him some resources that he could do stuff with. And then also this last weekend, I have some of those visuals up in the market, and I've had a couple of people tell me that they knew nothing about the project, which is why I think it's good that a community meeting be held so that people who don't live up the hill or live down the hill, they can come and see what's going on. A lot of people there now that they'll probably get a postcard, they will reach out, and I think that's a really good thing. But people are clueless, and I think that surprising them with something as drastic as what the plan is will really have people with a bunch of negative feelings. I don't know. I just wanted to reach out to you and let you know that my neighbor hasn't had any outreach at all. And actually, I haven't had much outreach either from them. I asked them, hey, you want to have once they told me they weren't going to do core drills on my property anymore, I revoked their right of entry, because if they don't have a plan to do anything on my property, then what am I going to do? So, and they know, and Faith knows that if they want to come onto my property, I'm more than happy, but I want a plan because I'm on a steep slope and I'm concerned. So I want somebody to tell me what are they going to do? I still don't know. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. We see nobody else on the audience. Is there anybody on the web?
If you want to address the council, please use the raise hand function. Doesn't look like it, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, citizens. We'll close citizens' comment and move on.
I'd like to
Okay.
move the consent calendar.
Second.
Consent calendar has been moved in second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Passes unanimously. Thank you, council. Next up, council discussion action, King County Regional Homeless Authority, KCRHA, Memorandum of Understanding. City Administrator Hill, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. We can make this really quick tonight. I do have Alexis from the Homeless Authority, Regional Homeless Authority. She is online, so let her pop in. At your last meeting, we discussed this MOU, and you remember this was a requirement that you put forth that before the mayor could enter into the agreement with King County Regional Homeless Authority, that you wanted an MOU of how the dollars would be spent that are coming from Lake Forest Park. At the last meeting, we discussed emergency weather shelters and homeless program services for families and children or young youth and adults. And what came out of that discussion was the council's direction that, am I too quiet?
Yes.
I have never been told that before. Sorry. Usually told to be quiet. And so out of that discussion, administration was directed to draft the MOU that would focus on the recommendation from the authority that the dollars go towards the emergency weather shelter. And so that is what is in the MOU that's in your packet tonight. Alexis is online if you want to ask her any questions, and I'll stand for any questions quietly.
There. Council, any questions? We are not seeing any, Phil. Yes.
Any for?
Yes. Councilmember Goldman.
Not really a question, just feedback. I appreciate you putting in kind of like telling us what the $16,000 gets us in terms of severe weather services. So that I'm supportive.
Thank you.
That was all Alexis. She gave you all that data.
Yeah. Any other questions or statements for Alexis?
Mayor?
Yes. Councilmember Riddle.
So just looking at, again, what our allocation would do for the severe weather shelter, was that independent of the resources that would be coming from the other ILA cities?
So I don't know. I think that was additive, right, Alexis? That's the additional nights or time of shelter that is added by our dollars.
Okay. Okay, so there was a baseline before our 16 and this is
Yeah,
what the
this would
16
give
brings
us
it.
20 additional, I think
additional.
it was roughly 20 additional days.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And then that was based off of, what was, sorry, $30 an hour for staff. Thank you. I just found it.
Any other comments? Okay. Alexis, I know you have your mic off because probably you're in your kitchen, probably cooking right now. So I didn't want to hear your chicken frying. So thank you. I appreciate that. But where would you like to go, Phil?
This looks for action tonight to authorize the mayor to enter into the agreement with the authority.
Okay. Councilmember Cassover.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move that we approve the signing of the memorandum of understanding between the King County Regional Homeless Authority and the City of Lake Forest Park, Washington. And is that the
Yeah,
right?
to allocate the city funds for the emergency weather shelter. And then with that authorization, the mayor is then authorized to execute the agreement.
Do I need to say all that?
No, by doing the MOU, you said that previously when you approved the agreement, that this action had to be approved before he could sign that. So by doing this action, we go back to that one.
Okay, and I'll second whatever that was. The
If you
MOU.
just-
I second
Yeah,
the MOU.
okay. Is there any other it's been moved in second. Any other discussion on the MOU? Seeing none, all those in favor of the King County Regional Homeless Authority MOU, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Passes unanimously. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Phil. Thank you, Alexis. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening.
Thank you, council. Take care.
Bye. You bet. Okay, with that, we're going ordinance and resolution for council discussion, ordinance 23-1263, creating chapter 12.50 Lake Forest Park Municipal Code, retaining walls. City Administrator. City Administrator Kim is here tonight.
When I'm the administrator. Good evening, council. So this is your third touch on the draft retaining wall ordinance, but as you know, we have not gone through the SEPA process yet or had a public hearing, so we are not asking you to do anything with the ordinance tonight. That is all in the works. I talked to Director Bennett before he left this week, and he's got that in process. You'll see in the draft of the ordinance you have tonight, some changes, edits have been made since your last two meetings. So please let me know if you see anything in those edits or anywhere else in the draft ordinance. We did add the wall type has to be the same from the highest to the lowest portion. Terraces have to be the same material, and a monitoring of 5 years for any trees that are planted. And to the guidance, a vegetative wall has been added as an option. So I'm happy to discuss any issues or questions you had on those revisions.
Any questions? Yes, Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, I think my only question is going back to C1 about the rockery and timber or concrete laggings. And the only thing I was wondering if we could look into is allowing concrete or timber laggings behind a more acceptable facade. And I don't know if that makes any difference in the reality of it, but thinking about those methods of construction as being relatively minimally invasive, but not necessarily the final look that we're going for. I'm
I don't know if it would make sense to clarify that that's not to be the final look of a retaining wall.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
And then just a second item, and then I will pass it on to my colleague. The thought came up if there would ever be independent sound retention walls that weren't also utilized as a retaining wall. So something that was just a freestanding sound retention wall, we would appreciate it applying to similar language, I would assume. So don't know if that would ever come up, but if there was ever a need to just put a sound barrier wall, I would like to know how that would be integrated, if not now, in the future, into this policy.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you. Just, that's an interesting point in that if we do have a sound wall consideration, it should follow similar kind of aesthetic requirements, because you can put up really ugly sound walls. There's no shortage of those. The other is that as I read section 5, maybe it's just a nuance that escaped me, but it seemed as though we have a 3-year irrigation maintenance monitoring plan for plants and a 5-year for trees. I would only offer that we perhaps follow the WSDOT standards, which are typically 3 years. They don't really distinguish between a plant and a tree.
Thank you.
It's a state highway, and so there's some advantages to follow some of the similar standards that they use.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything. Okay, council, anybody have any other business?
I do have a question. I'm sorry. It just
Okay,
occurred to me.
sorry.
Apologize. You were very good to clarify for us, Kim, that we still need the SEPA and the public hearing. And I just wondered if you could give us a bit of insight into actually what those steps are and how long they take and what we expect to, when we would expect to have those things happen.
Sure. I can give you a rough idea. SEPA, the city staff will do a checklist, a SEPA checklist, and then based on that, issue a threshold determination for this ordinance. That needs to be done, and the appeal period needs to pass before council takes action on the ordinance. So that's probably at least 3 weeks away. And also, notice also has to go to the state of the draft ordinance. That can all fit within that 3-week time frame because you can ask for expedited review, which they usually do grant very freely. And then holding the public hearing, city clerk gives notice that we can usually get that all wound up in about 10 days. So that's the time frame you're looking at for those.
Thank you very much. And if my memory serves, we have in the past held a public hearing and then followed that by a vote on the item. So
Yes.
we'd be able to do that someday. All right. Thank you. Just wanted to clarify that in my own mind. Thanks.
Before I let you go, Kim, I was gonna say, I've learned with this council, you can't go quite right away. So Larry, what can I do for you?
Well, I just wanted to follow up on process. Does the council need to officially vote to direct the city to start the SEPA process, or is it enough that we've kind of informally reached consensus?
There's actually a SEPA official in the city and they make that determination. So you actually don't have to do anything. We just don't do it until staff doesn't do it until they have an idea of what direction council's going, because if you made too big a change in the draft, we might have to do SEPA again or give notice to the state again. And so we usually want to know we're on the right track. It's gonna look something like this.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think you got it this time. Thank you very much. Okay, we're gonna move on to other business. Councilmember French.
Yes,
Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to take a quick moment to note the passing of a friend and colleague, Carolyn Armanini, who served on this council admirably and with distinction for 12 years. as well as serving on the Fire District Board as well. And I understand that the city will be recognizing her at an upcoming meeting, but I did want to note with sadness that she passed over the weekend. She was an environmentalist, an animal lover, and a friend, and we will be missing her dearly. So thank you for.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Okay, council committee reports. Do we have any council committee meetings? Had a finance meeting, didn't we?
We did.
Was it last week? It was like a month ago. Let's see. I think everyone was at that meeting. So is there anything? Except
Missing.
you were, that's right, you were missing.
I zoomed in from Fresno, so it's.
I'm trying to remember off the top of my head what we even talked. At this point, I apologize.
Quite all right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, of course, yes. So we did talk, we had the director's report, and thank you, Lindsay, very much for that, as well as discussing investment, considering moving forward with the previously recommended investment strategy that goes back that we first started discussing in 2019, if I'm not correct. And so there were a number of questions about that regarding the investment policy, including whether starting with a base amount of $5 million would make sense, or whether there should be an additional amount of money that was put into the mix. It was noted also too that because the rates have become much more favorable, where the longer we wait to implement the policy and give Lindsay the authorization, Director Vaughn the authorization to move forward with it, that we're sort of leaving funds on the table, earnings on the table that potentially could help us weather inflationary pressures, as well as be far better than the almost negligible returns that we're receiving currently. And I think
Anybody else?
I covered everything.
Thanks for telling my city finance director she's not very memorable. I appreciate that. It's good for staff morale there. Okay, with that, we'll go on to council member reports. Councilmember Cassover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I attended a couple of solid waste meetings since we last met, both the Solid Waste Advisory Committee and the Metropolitan Solid Waste Advisory Committee. I think the most important thing to come out of those meetings was the legislative updates. The state legislature is dealing with quite a lot of bills that affect solid waste this session. The sort of sad news for me is that the RAP Act, which is the act that would put more responsibility on producers for the packaging that they use, doesn't look like it's going to get passed this year, according to some of my contacts at the state legislature. The medication for both people and animals apparently is a big hang up here, and the packaging that's used for those products. And also the garbage haulers are very concerned about the bottle bill, particularly here in King County, where we already have good glass recycling. The truth is, though, the rest of the state doesn't have good glass recycling. So the bottle bill, even though it would change things here in King County, would be a great benefit to the rest of the state. So it may be that this bill needs to be slimmed down a bit, and a few more exceptions put in there, and maybe it'll come back next year, you know, fingers crossed. But the good news is that the extended producer responsibility bill for batteries looks like it's going to sail right through. So that's good. The other bill that I think's of interest to many of us is the right to repair bill for your electronic products, your digital products. That looks like it's doing well. The plastic pollution reduction bill also looks like it's doing well, and that would have an effect maybe on some of our residents who might have docks that include styrofoam and other plastic things to make them buoyant, you know, if they have floating docks, because that's going to affect that. So yeah, there's a few other things. EPR for appliances that have refrigerants in them, that looks like it's going through. No, that's probably dead this year, they said. But the light bulbs, EPR for all light bulbs, that looks like it's going to go through. So the other meeting that I should tell you about is the North Urban Human Services Alliance. We had a presentation from King County on their behavioral health levy that's coming up this year. They're also calling it the Crisis Response Center levy. NUSA is North Urban Human Services Alliance is a collection of human service agencies. And so many of them will benefit from this particular bill. It's not going to give money to them, but it's going to give a place for folks to take individuals who are in crisis, which we just don't have up here at this point. It's also going to provide additional beds. So anyway, there was strong support from members of NUSA for this, and they did vote to endorse it. I voted myself, but I voted and I made clear, and it's in the minutes, that I voted as an individual, not as a representative of the city, because that's a decision that we as a council have to make at another time. They also are following a lot of bills at the state legislature, mostly to do with housing, some of which I'm probably not in agreement with the rest of my colleagues on NUSA, because it does affect Lake Forest Park in ways that I'm not sure work for our city, but strong interest in low income and middle income housing. So that's my report from both those groups.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, the Parks Board met last night with our new member. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And we're still a pretty small group, but hopefully growing over time. They had taken a couple of month hiatus over the winter months. So this was the kickoff to talk with Corey about their work plan and think about the topics that they wanted to emphasize. It was a pretty engaged, active meeting. They're still meeting by Zoom, but it isn't impairing the conversation at all and the dialogue and the relationship. So that was very good. They are going to continue to do the yoga in the parks. That was the experiment last year. It had, 40 to 60 people per session showing up. So it was a big success. They're still going to limit it to 6 weeks because of, the work that's involved both from the volunteers and the city staff to put it together. But there are some things that can be done to streamline it. It also is an opportunity to do some community outreach on other Parks Board and lakefront master planning projects. So there's more opportunity to engage with the community there. They're looking at expanding that model a little bit to look at perhaps a couple of community walks that could be done on a different day. Or possibly a session at Grace Cole that could be on, the beavers and the birds. Basically, not the birds and the bees, the beavers and the birds.
You like the same thing.
Yeah. So, let's see. They were very interested in the timeline so that they could start thinking and planning ahead on the master planning process for the lakefront property. Corey, indicated that we're moving ahead with the RFQ very soon. But they were interested in seeing something over the next 12 months, like what's a rough schedule subject to change once we have the consultant come on. There was a question about whether we were doing the master planning process for all the parks in parallel with the lakefront park. I've since clarified that we're going to do those sequentially. We just don't have the staff and resources to do that. And I think that will relieve the Parks Board because that could be a little much for a group of volunteers. So I'm really positive and enthusiastic on the group as it's shaping up, and it should be a fun year ahead.
I will tell you that new park is one of my selling points when I interview people. It's like you got a chance to be on ground zero of one of the coolest things that happens to the city in a long time. I hope you'll be bringing, how many do you I thought you had only one more empty one. Do you have?
Well, that's
And a high school.
that's if we only want to have 6 members. I think given the the workload and the fact that they're looking at staffing community engagement booths, we could use 1 or 2 extra people if there was interest.
Well, that's,
So, because you always have at least one person who can't attend. So I personally would encourage, you know, keeping an open door on the possibility of additional representatives.
like I brought up to the council before, I am totally in on going as far as to maybe have alternates that can sit there and have no voting rights. I mean, that doesn't sound good, but have, unless somebody's gone, they can vote, but you've done a really good job of getting the word out. My newsletter blurbs and everything have helped a lot, and we have been getting a lot more interest. Like I always say, I'm amazed at the people that do volunteer.
And there were thanks on pickleball or to the city.
Yeah, that was a good interview too. So we will keep working on that and we'll keep getting the word out. I think I'm gonna put it out in my little news bleep this week, whatever, too, about just trying to get people. And again, we could use a high school person for sure.
Yeah.
We could use some high school people, it looks like, on the environmental task force coming up. So and thank you, Lori, for all you do with that. And thanks for keeping an eye on the planning commission too.
It's fun. They're both really good engaged groups. So I feel pretty lucky.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Fairtime.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I attended the K4C Outreach Committee meeting a couple of Fridays ago. And the discussion was about HB 1110, which is the so-called missing middle housing bill. And I don't know what the status of that bill is. Administrator Hill probably knows better. But what was interesting to me about that was basically the discussion around it, in which there were some councils that were for it, some councils that were against it. It essentially encourages increasing density citywide, but specifically around transit hubs, just to get people more affordable housing near where they can actually commute to work. And the interesting thing is that a lot of cities are coming to the realization that just offering housing density by itself isn't really the solution to the problem. It's what somebody called trickle down housing, where you just have a bunch of market rate housing and people can't afford those. But the idea is that maybe the outlying areas then would become more attractive, which kind of defeats the purpose. So Bothell is proposing a code change, which I found interesting, which is instead of mandating unit affordability, they're mandating unit attainability, which I think is an interesting shift in the way they're thinking about this particular problem, where you're looking at essentially what income levels do you want to have inhabiting these kinds of houses. Figured I'd throw that in. Thanks.
Good. Yes. Anybody else? Tom, anything? Okay. Oh, yes, Council. I'm just gonna, yes, Councilmember Castle.
Well, Mr. Mayor and Mr. Deputy Mayor, we all attended
Of course.
a meeting, a gathering, I don't know if we call it a meeting exactly, with our Congresswoman Jamil Jayapal, sorry. To look at the culvert at 195th Street. And that was a very good session. I myself have to admit that while I have certainly driven by that culvert many times and even walked by it a little bit, I've never really looked at it really carefully. And boy, that thing is a mess. So, and that was very evident, I think, to the Congresswoman as well, and also to the member of the Army Corps of Engineers staff who was there. And so, and there were folks also there from Shoreline, quite a large contingent from Shoreline, actually. It was quite a crowd. But anyway, it was a very good conversation that we had with the Congresswoman. And I think she's very supportive of everything we're trying to do there. And I look forward to good things happening.
May I?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vice Chair Castlever, for reminding me of that. I apologize. I'm a little tired tonight. It was an outstanding meeting. I too was surprised a little bit by the number of folks in attendance, but always welcome. The conversations with the Congresswoman and her staff, as well as with our friends from Shoreline, was simply outstanding. And I also too want to highlight our friend Laura from the Army Corps, who I had met through various things, including the Lake Ballinger Forum previously, and the work that she does on the Lake Washington Ship Canal, and having these relationships not only with the other cities and with, of course, representatives from around the region, but also these government agencies like the Army Corps long-term relationships are really helping us move forward as a region and as a collective of cities, because we're all, together relative to that culvert. It's a very big deal to make sure that that doesn't fail. You can barely even see the water passing through it. That's how in poor shape it is. And I was very, very impressed with Representative Jaipal's questions and comments and her staff's follow-up as well. So thank you for reminding me.
You're welcome. And if I could just add that, apropos to some other conversations we've had already this evening, the fact that we are cooperating with Shoreline and are partnering with them on this project, I think makes a huge difference. And when it comes to gaining funding and support from, levels of government above us, it really is an advantage. And so I think that some of the conversation we've had earlier this evening about partnerships is very well taken, and we should follow the example that we've already set for ourselves and just keep doing that. Just
You
keep
bet.
building those partnerships with our neighboring cities. It really makes a difference.
Councilmember Shertani, and then Councilmember Bodie, then Councilmember Brittle, then Councilmember Lebo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for my colleagues for reminding me. There was a meet and greet with Representative Susan Del Bene, who's not our representative, but Mountain Lake Terrace was hosting it, and as part of the Lake Ballinger Forum, they invited us. And I really wanted to thank a couple of former council members, Mark Phillips and Don Feeney, for attending. And we ended up talking about culverts, oddly enough. And and the representative did make an excellent point, which is that watersheds don't follow political boundaries. And so the work that she does in her district will benefit, of course, our water downstream and vice versa. So I think building these kind of cross-district relationships is super important. I was glad to be part of it.
I think they attended because it was at a brewery.
Not allowed to be. Did you, Councilmember Bodie?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I wanted to follow up on the comment made in the public comment session about the public meeting or open house that Sound Transit has tentatively agreed to on March 15th. And I appreciate the efforts of our staff to get a date because it has been a very long time. And I share the concern that an open house format from 3 to 7 is not the best opportunity. And I have been to 2 Sound Transit open house sessions, and they were not that great. One was at the Spartan Gym in Shoreline. That was on our project, and the people who were there didn't even know where Lake Forest Park was and had never been there. And the other one was a virtual one, I think, that was hosted by Sound Transit during the pandemic. But they were very little interaction with the community, more talking by Sound Transit, and very limited visual information that we were talking about. So I do think that shifting the meeting time and perhaps having part that's an open house, but then making sure there is a substantial amount of time to hear from the community with leadership from Sound Transit, that's important. So I just wanted to say I personally support that and hope our staff will encourage Sound Transit to do the right thing.
Could I follow
Yes.
up on that too? I suspect that quite a number of us on the council would like to participate, to attend that. So I think I need to alert the city administration that meeting should be noticed, because there may be more than a quorum of council at that meeting.
Excellent point.
If you could do
Yeah.
that'd be that puts all of our minds at rest that we can actually go. So thank you.
Thank you for the thought.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, seeing none. I'm gonna go down a little different path tonight. I can talk. You guys do a great job. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you. You're fantastic. I'm really excited about what we going on. Lori, I like your comments about we don't have money, and that is truth. We have to be truthful about what's going on there. But my point, I'm going to be a little bit, we have the Stewardship Foundation, we have our new Climate Action Committee, we have Stream Keepers, we got the Ballinger Forum, we got everything in the world. I am a true believer that if somebody gave us $20 million, we could clean up every culvert to Mount Lake Terrace and do some work on the water, and we would bring salmon back. But our problem is we have a lot of people at the top, and I'm sorry to say this, in Olympia that like to talk a lot, but nothing seems to get done. And I read an article, and the reason I'm so upset, I read an article today that the state is selling a large swath, and I can't tell you how many acres, but a very large swath of, and I don't even think it was old growth, I think it was mature forest. And it's a, big deal, a really large amount of trees to be logged for $2.8 million. $2.8 million is crap. And if we have a state that really cares about the environment so much, how come we can't get money to fix a culvert? We can't get money for our environmental task force. They want to do zoning that's going to make us so we can't even zone to keep our city nice or keep our trees. So we got to figure out where the disconnect is. How come the people down here really want to take care of it? I mean, I own a repair shop and I'm dying to put culverts and I want to get fish in the creek. Ballinger Forum, I made the same speech. They are all there working so hard as two districts, to Snohomish County, King County, all these people working to do something that everybody says they want to do, but the state won't help us do it. So we shouldn't have to beg to do our climate action committee for money. None of us should have to do that. And 2.8 million is a joke. They said it was going to go towards, education and this and that. We all know 2.8 millions won't even do 1/3 of the culvert I need to do. So we need to somehow get the message that, let's be real. Are we going to care about the environment? Are we going to talk about it or what? But I'm very proud of the people we have in the city because we are doing a great job in our 3x3 square mile. But
Mr. Mayor, I do think that that's because state law, the funding of public schools was originally set up so that our state public lands and timber, logging practices would fund our public schools. And there's not been an update an improved, there's been a somewhat improved funding mechanism, as we heard when we met with the school board, but still not something that brings us into the modern era. So that's just an egregious example.
My point though is, why are we cutting down trees when we're spending all our time trying to save trees?
Save trees.
It just got me very frustrated. I didn't get to read the rest of the article because I got so mad, but it's just annoying as all hell that we are trying so hard to do the good for the people and we're not getting help. So, I hope somebody in Olympia listens to this. They probably don't, but I really, really do care about the people. They do a great job. We're all trying our best to do everything. The staff is doing an amazing amount of work. I couldn't even see the city administrator day because he had so many meetings lined up in a row. I was kind of hurt by that, but I'm not saying that out loud. But, we will do what we can. We work together, get those commissions. I'm really excited about the Parks Board. We have a lot of stuff. Corey's got some grandpa weeder things now, so you got that to look forward to. So the world's a great place. And try your oranges, and if you want more, I can set you up. I know a guy. And with that, I will move on to our city administrator. And Bill, what would you like? Anything you need to say tonight?
Well, it was Tracy's fault that I couldn't meet with you today. He came to my office. So no.
I know, he didn't have his key. I let him in.
Yeah. And then he came in and locked my door. No, I just quickly to Councilmember Bodie's point about Sound Transit and their meeting and the lack of having kind of a really set question and answer. We made that request almost 2 weeks ago already. So we're working with them to have them change that format. I don't think it harms anything to have an open house session, but at some point, let's sit down, let people ask questions, let everybody else hear it back. And so I think you saw that in some emails today. So we're working on that. And then the only other thing I had to add is that yet again, the city got the Well City Award through AWC. We had enough people working out and doing healthy things. And so in 2024, we will continue to save 2% on our health insurance. So what we budgeted will be enough. Great. That's all I've got tonight.
Thank you. Every single person in this room has talked tonight, except the one we always forget about, Lindsay. Would you like to say anything? I think she's very memorable. And Chief, how about you? Would you like, you got any updates on the Boston Kraken game or anything?
Oh, is it bad?
Well, if Boston's ahead, then Jeff's ecstatic. Our city, our public works director is at the game tonight. He's a huge Boston Bruins fan, so.
I just want to say thanks again, as I often do, to the chief and the department. And, you know, I want to say, I think our city really appreciates our officers and all they do.
That'll be another thing. We're having a serious conversation pretty soon, council. We have to make some decisions with that stuff. So put that on your calendar because that's going to happen sooner than later. And with that, anything else, Tom?
I just wanted to thank the department as well. I understand it was a really challenging situation. It's in the city administrator's report. And actually I heard about it last night from members of the board of the Civic Club. I'm so thankful for both the efforts of the citizens and the officers that responded with kindness and real consideration for a troubled young person.
Thank you. Okay, council, have a great evening. Have a great weekend. Yeah, thanks. I have someone in the